Okay, let's talk about Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. First, I want to quickly summarize the story that you just read. So, we've got a narrator telling us the story, confessing that he's murdered an old man for no other reason than he didn't like the old man's eye. He sneaks into the old man's bedroom while he's asleep, stabs him to death, and then he works really hard to cover up his crime. He cuts the guy into pieces and buries him beneath the floorboards. He even catches his blood in a tub so none is spilled on the floor. Then there's a knock on the door. It's the police. A neighbor has heard the old man yell overnight, and they called the police. He lets the police officers in to search the house. He's acting very, very calmly. He's covering up his crime very well. They don't suspect anything. He gets cocky. He invites them into the old man's room, and there things start to go bad for the narrator. As they talk, he begins to hear what he thinks is the old man's heart beating from beneath the floorboards, taunting him, torturing him from beyond the grave. The sound of the old man's beating heart eventually proves to be too much for him to take. He can't stand it anymore. He confesses his crime to the police and tells them to rip up the floorboards. So what we have here is what we call an unreliable narrator. He's not reliable. We can't trust him. He's telling us the story. We depend on him to tell us the story, but we can't really believe everything because something is wrong with his story. In this case, the narrator is mad. He's insane. He's crazy. He spends a good portion of the story trying to tell the reader over and over again that he's not mad, that he's not crazy. A truly sane person would not need to convince us that he's sane, right? We would just know. I don't need to tell you that this shirt is blue. You can tell. I don't have to convince you. But a man who insists over and over again that he is sane, that makes us doubt what he's saying. Okay, that's an unreliable narrator. So let's take a look at some text evidence. Let's look at what the narrator tells us to prove he's sane. In the first paragraph, he says, "Look how calmly I tell you the whole story." Well, he does calmly tell us a story of murdering an old man for no reason other than he didn't like his eye. If a sane person were to commit a crime like that, it would probably be really difficult to tell that story in a calm fashion. You'd most likely be very nervous and sweaty and shaky and shifty. Later in paragraph 12, we have more text evidence. He's again trying to convince us how sane he is. And a direct quote from the text is, "If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs." Okay, so he's offering us more proof that he's not mad. But his proof is that he cut an old man's arms and legs off. Not exactly reliable proof. So it's another example of not only his madness, but also this being an unreliable narrator. Now, another cool thing about this portion of the text, again, we see Poe manipulating time, right? He's stopping and starting. He's making time move fast, or he's slowing time down. Remember earlier in the text, he spent about an hour and about 4 lines of text telling us how he looked into the old man's room to make sure he was sleeping. He slowed time down there. Now he is speeding time up. He uses just 2 sentences and 15 words to tell us that he dismembered a corpse by cutting off arms and legs. That would take a long time. Poe speeds time up and does it in 2 short sentences. Another example of his madness is the motive for committing the murders in the first place. He confesses that it was not for any justifiable reason that he kills the man. He says it was his eye. In fact, he says he thinks it was his eye, almost as if he's trying to convince himself after the fact that that was why he did it. Let's look at the text evidence. "I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this." He loved him. The old man never wronged him. The old man never insulted him. He says, "I didn't even want his money. I think it was his eye." So now we are convinced that the narrator is crazy. He's insane. This is why Poe is so brilliant. The narrator is trying to tell us how sane he is, but Poe uses that storyline to prove to us that he's not sad. He is, in fact, mad. So now that we accept he's mad, we buy into the fact that it's perfectly reasonable that he hears the heart beating of a dead man underneath the floorboards.